Hey folks, this is Kelani. If you think back to BlizzCon, you might recall a few different systems being planned for the Battle for Azeroth expansion to expand our options for playable content. The two major new systems were Warfronts and Island Expeditions. Well, we're now able to get a sneak peek at how the Island Expeditions might end up looking and playing because they're now available for testing on the Battle for Azeroth Alpha. This is the first time we're able to actually play the expeditions, so this is a first look at how they're shaping up and what we think so far. Bear in mind that with this being an early preview, everything is still subject to change. Some parts could be missing, others might be placeholders, and overall this is very much still a work in progress. But it's fun to see Blizzard lay the groundwork for the Island Expeditions, as we might end up playing through them quite a lot depending on how everything turns out in the end. So let's see what these expeditions are all about. To get yourself signed up for an island expedition, you need to head down to the docks of your respective faction. For the Horde, that's at the Zuldazar Harbour, and for the Alliance, that's the Borealis Harbour. There you will find an expedition table set up right next to one of your ships. I guess we're taking that ship out to find our island. We're headed out into open water after all. Interact with the table to sign up solo or as a group. The table itself actually mentions this is a placeholder UI and will be improved in the future, so expect something super shiny on that front sometime soon. At the moment, you have to be physically present at the docks to be able to queue for expeditions. There's no queue system like the Dungeon Finder or Looking for Raid where you can just queue out in the world anywhere you want. We'll have to wait and see if that changes or not to allow you to queue for these scenarios from anywhere in the world. Personally, I would love for them to keep things at the docks. It gives heading out on a boat a little more meaning, seeing as we don't actually get to do any of the sailing ourselves. When your island expedition is ready, you'll be sent to a random island. Right now we only have one available for testing, but I believe the plan is to have quite a variety of islands you could end up on. The goal of the expedition is to collect 6,000 Azerite, but you're not alone on these islands. There will be a team from the opposite faction which is trying to secure the Azerite as well. So it's a race. First faction to 6,000 Azerite wins. Right now the opposing faction is a team of NPCs, and I believe that's the plan for the majority of island expeditions. At BlizzCon they talked about being able to change the difficulty of the island expeditions from normal up to mythic, which will all be against these teams of NPCs, but they also want to work a PvP version in where you can queue against actual players of the opposite faction just to spice things up a little bit. Either way, the goal remains the same: collect 6,000 Azerite before your opponents. You can collect Azerite from pretty much anywhere on the island, from killing monsters to opening chests and even just mining the Azerite from the various nodes that spawn all over the island. Every monster, NPC and player has a debuff while on the island which tells you how much Azerite you gained for killing them. Most of the monsters reward a handful, but some of them award a sizable chunk. Obviously, the harder the monster is to kill, the more Azerite it's going to be worth, so you can run around killing every little small thing you come across and stock up slowly, or you can go for the big targets which take a bit longer to kill but reward you handsomely for your efforts. Quite a few packs of monsters protect a variety of goodies too. Chests contain extra Azerite, shrines can be used to give you some helpful or hinder some buffs, and there's a whole bunch of random items scattered around for a variety of purposes. You can also gain Azerite from helping friendly NPCs. You'll have to find the appropriate items to help rescue them from whatever predicament they've got themselves into. You should be particularly wary of the opposite faction, as even though they're usually NPCs, they're a little smarter than your average monster. They actually play for the objectives instead of just being a hindrance to you, so they'll fight you for chests, kill off big monsters so you don't get their Azerite, and if you do end up encountering them, they'll use a few tricks to try and kill you or escape with their lives. Keep a close eye on your Azerite counter debuff, because if you happen to die to the opposite faction, they could get a huge chunk of Azerite which would launch them in the lead. But on the flip side, if your opponents are currently engaged with a large monster and they're all worth a good amount of that tasty Azerite, you can ruin their day by taking them out and finishing off the monster they were working on. It's a double whammy of Azerite, and that's the kind of tactics you're going to need to employ if you want to win on these islands. You definitely have to be on your toes with some of the monsters that spawn here, especially when the opposite faction comes knocking on your door while you're trying to fight a bunch of monsters. The faction NPCs aren't too difficult to deal with, but maybe that's because we're automatically set on the easiest difficulty. We don't have an option to change that right now. They deal quite a bit of damage, but they seem to die pretty quickly, so as long as your group focus fires them down, they shouldn't give you too much trouble. They do seem smarter than normal NPCs though, so hopefully the new AI is working properly. I feel like the dev team might have overemphasized the potential of jumping though. Some of the NPCs jump around constantly, which is pretty hilarious because it's like watching a lot of players in random BGs, so that part was semi-convincing. Apparently there's quite a few groups of NPCs planned as well, so you never know who will be waiting for you on the next island. Maybe it's a group of rogues, maybe a group of mages, maybe it's a pack of worgen or a band of pirates. Changing up the NPCs is going to be huge for the replayability of the island expeditions. As well as having a multitude of sources of Azerite available to you, the island expeditions are full of random events which change up how you might want to approach gathering your Azerite. In one of our test runs, we managed to see a huge amount of Azerite burst forth on one of the beaches, along with some crazy powerful Azerite creatures. In one of our games, we had a pretty extended back and forth with the opposite faction for this area because the amount of Azerite available was huge. So we'd kill them and get as much as we can, but they'd come straight back and try and stop us from getting it all. It was really fun, but some of these creatures are crazy strong. For the most part, the creatures on the island are fairly easy to deal with. Some of them deal a bunch of damage but can be kited relatively easily, but these Azerite creatures had a channeled spell which almost one-shots you, so that was interesting to deal with. If you manage to clear out all of the monsters, and the opposite faction doesn't get there first, you're rewarded with a huge amount of Azerite, both from the creatures and the many mining nodes surrounding them. There's also an elemental event, where a bunch of elements appear all over the island, which seem to be kind of annoying to deal with, but a portal opened up once as well. Sadly, this event seemed to trigger really late into the expedition, so I got into the portal, but wasn't really able to explore too much. I remember from BlizzCon the dev team wanted to implement portals like this to take you to different areas where you have to deal with additional threats to either complete events or just plunder their stores of Azerite. You can see a giant elemental chap right near the portal entrance, so I'm assuming he's someone we're going to have to deal with, and there's probably a tasty Azerite reward for doing so. It seems like the plan is to make each expedition you go on as potentially different as possible. They'll change up starting locations, monster spawns, events, time of day, weather, cave structures, quest givers, environmental hazards, almost anything you could think of. If they can pull this off and it works properly, I can see people enjoying island expeditions for a very long time. There's also some interesting vendors to help you out in the wilderness. These vendors change periodically, I think they swap out every day or so, and they each offer unique items and gadgets which can be used on the islands and most of BFA by the looks of things. The vendors are located pretty close to your expedition tables, but their location might change if the process for queuing up for the expedition changes at a later date. But let's have a look at some of the fun stuff they have to offer. Each faction appears to get one faction-appropriate vendor, as well as a shady vendor. The faction-appropriate vendors offer the same kind of items. Here we have an item that mass roots enemies, an item which restores health and deals damage to attackers, and a powerful AoE buff which increases the damage your allies do and heals you over time. Even though the same effects appear on these items, some of the numbers are a little different, so maybe that will end up changing to ensure balance between the two factions. The shady vendor sells some grenades for a little bit of extra damage, a hidden cannon which deals quite a significant amount of damage on a short cooldown, as well as a trick vest which provides you with a large damage absorb shield and deals a huge amount of damage when it's removed. I think it would be a very smart idea to check out the vendors before heading out on any expeditions, just to make sure you have every advantage available to you to make your victory as easy as possible. Overall, it seems pretty easy to complete the requirements of the expedition. Just killing monsters, looting chests, and mining nodes gets you very close to the 6,000 goal. It's going to be fun figuring out the most efficient ways to collect Azerite, but I hope things end up well balanced to encourage a variety of activities instead of everyone just doing one thing because that's the fastest way to win. If you're curious about roles and how it's going to work being in a random queue, there doesn't seem to be any ideal group setup that the random queue is aiming for. You can be thrown in with one tank, one healer, and one DPS, or 3 DPS, or even 2 healers and a DPS. It just depends on who is queuing with you when you sign up. That should make these queues very fast in general because you won't have to wait for a tank or a healer. I think the real fun of the island expeditions is going to come with organised group play, setting out on random adventures with friends, not knowing which island you're going to get, which monsters will spawn, because all of that is going to be random too, which events you will encounter, or even which NPCs from the opposite faction will be fighting for control of the Azerite. I can see myself having a blast changing up our group composition, maybe swapping classes to see what works best, and just overall having a great time replaying these islands over and over. Sadly, as with any form of content, I think the draw and replayability will heavily rely on the rewards as well. Now, we don't actually have any rewards currently on the alpha, so your guess is as good as mine, but I think it's a safe bet to say that Azerite will be on that list somewhere. That's why we're on the islands. We're recovering Azerite for our faction to use. It would be absolute bonkers if Azerite wasn't part of the reward system. Additional to Azerite, I believe the dev team is also considering unique mounts and pets as rewards for completing island expeditions, but for now we'll just have to wait and see. Hopefully island expeditions are going to be worth our time as well as be incredibly fun. But that's it for this first look at island expeditions. What do you think so far? What excites you most about the idea of island expeditions? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.